The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Compound in Virginia Beach as Commander Jake Viper Morrison reviewed the day's training schedule. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from 15 years of leading some of the military's most elite operators. His weathered hands traced the mission parameters on the tactical display, but his mind wandered to the encrypted message that had arrived at 0500 hours. Another joint operations exercise with Air Force assets. Nothing unusual about that, except for the nagging feeling in his gut that wouldn't go away. Morrison had built his reputation on instinct as much as skill. The SEALs under his command respected him not just for his tactical brilliance, but for his ability to read situations others missed. He had led successful operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and half a dozen classified locations that officially didn't exist. His service record was impressive by any standard, though certain pages remained heavily redacted. What his men didn't know was that those redacted sections contained the most important chapters of his military career. The compound buzzed with activity as Team 7 prepared for the day's exercise. Morrison watched his operators conduct their equipment checks with practiced efficiency. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez secured his communications gear while running through radio protocols. Seaman Blake, the team's newest member, nervously adjusted his tactical vest for the third time. The kid had potential, but Morrison could see the uncertainty in his movements. Combat experience had a way of either forging warriors or breaking men, and Blake hadn't yet faced that crucible. "Commander, we have a situation developing." Chief Petty Officer Williams approached with a concerned expression. Williams had served under Morrison for 6 years and could read his commanding officer's moods better than most. Intelligence just pushed through an urgent update. "Our training exercise just became a real-world operation." Morrison's expression didn't change, but Williams noticed the slight tension in his jaw. "What's the nature of the situation?" "Hostage rescue. American civilian contractors taken by militants approximately 60 kilometers southeast of Kandahar. Local ground forces are compromised, and conventional rescue attempts have failed. Washington wants a small team insertion under cover of darkness." Williams handed over the briefing folder. "Air support will be provided by the 355th Fighter Wing out of Davis-Monthan." The mention of the 355th sent an unexpected jolt through Morrison's system. He had spent 3 years attached to that wing during a classified exchange program that officially never happened. The memories came flooding back. The screaming engines of F-16 Fighting Falcons, the precision of close air support missions, the brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat aviation. But that was another life, one he had buried deep when he transferred to Naval Special Warfare. "Timeline?" Morrison asked, his voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. "Wheels up in 6 hours. The weather window closes at 2300 local time. After that, we're looking at a 48-hour delay minimum." Williams paused. "Commander, there's something else. The militants are equipped with advanced surface-to-air missile systems. Russian-made, probably Iglis. Our air support is going to be operating in a heavily contested environment." Morrison nodded slowly. The Iglis was a formidable weapon system, capable of tracking and engaging aircraft at ranges that made traditional close air support extremely dangerous. Pilots would need to employ tactics that pushed both man and machine to their absolute limits. It was the kind of scenario that separated good aviators from legends. As the team began their accelerated mission preparation, Morrison found himself thinking about Captain Sarah Raptor Chun, the pilot who had saved his life during a mission that never officially occurred. She had been flying an F-16C that day, threading the needle between enemy positions to provide the precise fire support that allowed his team to extract from an impossible situation. Her call sign had been earned through a combination of aggressive flying and predatory instincts that made her one of the most feared pilots in theater. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, preparing to lead a SEAL team into combat, while somewhere out there, pilots like Chun were preparing to risk their lives providing the air support his mission would require. The lines between services blurred when the bullets started flying, but the memories of his own time in the cockpit remained crystal clear. Morrison's reverie was interrupted by the arrival of the mission intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes. She spread aerial reconnaissance photos across the briefing table, each image telling a piece of the larger tactical puzzle. The target compound is here. She pointed to a cluster of buildings surrounded by defensive positions. 3 confirmed hostages, approximately 15 to 20 militants. The terrain provides natural cover approaches from the north and east. What about extraction? Morrison studied the photos with the practiced eye of a veteran operator. This looks like a one-way trip if our air support can't establish air superiority. That's where it gets interesting, Hayes replied. Command is assigning a specialized close air support package. The lead pilot has experience with this type of precision engagement in contested airspace. Call sign Viper. The room went silent. Morrison felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. Viper had been his call sign during his classified Air Force assignment. The coincidence was impossible, yet there it was, staring back at him from the mission brief. Someone, somewhere, was playing a game that went far beyond standard operational procedures. Sir, are you all right? Blake's voice seemed to come from far away. Morrison realized he had been staring at the briefing materials for several seconds without speaking. Fine, Morrison replied, regaining his composure. Continue with the brief. Hayes outlined the insertion plan, a high-altitude, low-opening parachute drop that would place the team within striking distance of the target compound. They would have a narrow window to locate and secure the hostages before the militants could relocate or eliminate them. Success depended entirely on precise timing and coordination with air assets. As the briefing concluded and his team dispersed to complete their preparations, Morrison found himself alone with thoughts that threatened to overwhelm his professional demeanor. The classified Air Force assignment had been the defining period of his military career, though few people knew it existed. He had been selected for a highly specialized program that embedded experienced ground operators with fighter squadrons to improve close air support coordination. The program had been the brainchild of a forward-thinking general who recognized that the future of warfare would require unprecedented integration between ground and air assets. Morrison had been one of only 12 operators selected for the initial pilot program, and the only one from naval special warfare. For 3 years, he had lived and breathed tactical aviation, learning to think like a pilot while maintaining his ground combat expertise. The experience had transformed him in ways that extended far beyond tactical knowledge. He had gained an appreciation for the split-second decision-making required in aerial combat, the physical and mental demands of high-performance flight, and the unique brotherhood that existed among combat aviators. More importantly, he had learned to see battlefield situations from an aerial perspective, understanding how ground operations looked to the pilots providing support. That knowledge had made him a better SEAL commander, though he could never fully explain why to his superiors. The classified nature of his Air Force assignment meant that officially, those 3 years didn't exist. His service record showed a routine training assignment at Nellis Air Force Base, with no mention of the combat missions he had flown or the tactical innovations he had helped develop. Morrison's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was identified only as Falcon Actual, but the content made his blood run cold. Viper 6, game time. The pack is hunting again. Raptor sends. Only 3 people in the world knew about Operation Nighthawk, the classified mission that had forged an unbreakable bond between Morrison and the pilots of the 355th Fighter Wing. The message meant that Captain Chun was not only still flying, but was likely the pilot assigned to provide air support for tonight's mission. The circles were closing in ways that defied coincidence. Morrison deleted the message and began his own equipment preparation. His personal gear loadout reflected years of combat experience. A modified 416 Hong Kong dollars assault rifle with specialized optics, a Sig Sauer P226 sidearm, and enough ammunition to sustain a prolonged engagement. But tonight, he also packed something that hadn't seen operational use in over a decade, a tactical aviation radio with encryption protocols that officially didn't exist. The radio was a relic from his Air Force days, modified to communicate directly with fighter aircraft using frequencies and protocols known only to the most elite units. If Captain Chun was indeed providing air support, the radio would allow Morrison to coordinate with her using the tactical language they had developed during their classified operations together. As evening approached, Morrison gathered his team for final mission preparation. The men looked ready, their faces reflecting the focused intensity that came before combat operations. Rodriguez checked his medical kit one final time while Williams reviewed extraction procedures with the junior operators. Blake appeared nervous but determined, his earlier uncertainty replaced by professional resolve. "Listen up," Morrison addressed his team. "This operation is straightforward in concept, but complex in execution. We insert, locate the hostages, neutralize the threat, and extract. Success depends on precise coordination with our air support and maintaining operational security throughout the mission." He paused, studying each man's face. "The militants have advanced anti-aircraft weapons, which means our air support will be operating under extreme risk. Every decision we make on the ground directly impacts the safety of the pilots providing cover. Remember that when the shooting starts." The team loaded their equipment into the transport aircraft as darkness settled over the compound. Morrison took a final look at the mission brief, memorizing details that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The weather forecast showed clear skies over the target area with minimal wind. Perfect conditions for precision operations. As the aircraft lifted off, Morrison found himself thinking about the strange coincidences that had brought him to this moment. The appearance of his old call sign, the involvement of his former squadron, and the encrypted message from someone who knew about Operation Nighthawk. Either the military's personnel assignment system had developed an impossible sense of irony, or powerful forces were orchestrating events for reasons he couldn't yet understand. The flight to the operational area would take 4 hours, giving Morrison time to review the tactical plan and prepare his team for the challenges ahead. But as the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's mission would force him to confront a past he had spent years trying to bury. The legend he had been in the Air Force was about to collide with the commander he had become in the SEALs, and the consequences would ripple far beyond a single hostage rescue operation. Outside the aircraft windows, stars filled the clear night sky, the same stars he had navigated by during countless combat missions in the cockpit of an F-16. Morrison closed his eyes and began the mental preparation that had sustained him through years of dangerous operations. Tonight, he would lead his team into combat with the support of pilots who shared his understanding of warfare's deadly ballet. The question that haunted him was whether the ghosts of his Air Force past would prove to be assets or liabilities when the mission reached its critical moments. The C-130 Hercules transport aircraft cut through the darkness at 30,000 feet, its engines maintaining a steady drone that had become background noise for the SEAL team aboard. Morrison sat in the red-lit cargo compartment, reviewing satellite imagery on his ruggedized tablet while his team made final equipment checks. The target compound lay 6 hours ahead, but his mind kept drifting to memories of a different kind of mission preparation. 12 years earlier, he had sat in a similar aircraft, but wearing a flight suit instead of tactical gear. The mission had been Operation Nighthawk, a classified rescue operation that had gone catastrophically wrong until Captain Sarah Chun and her wingmen had turned the tide with flying that defied both physics and common sense. The successful extraction had cemented Morrison's reputation within the Air Force Special Operations community, but it had also marked the beginning of the end of his aviation career. 30 minutes to drop zone, the loadmaster announced over the intercom. Morrison's team began the familiar ritual of final gear checks and equipment verification. Rodriguez secured his medical supplies while Williams confirmed radio frequencies with the aircraft's communications officer. Blake ran through his assigned tasks one final time, his nervous energy now channeled into professional focus. Morrison activated his tactical radio and tuned to the frequency listed in the mission brief. Static filled his earpiece for several seconds before a familiar voice broke through the interference. "SEAL Element, this is Viper Flight Lead. Radio check, over." The voice belonged to Captain Chun, though her call sign had evolved from Raptor to Viper Flight Lead, indicating her promotion to squadron leadership. Morrison keyed his microphone using protocols that hadn't been employed in over a decade. "Viper Lead, this is Groundhog 6. Radio check loud and clear. Authentication Charlie 77. The pause that followed lasted only seconds, but Morrison could imagine Chen's surprise at hearing the authentication code that had been used during Operation Nighthawk. "Groundhog 6, authentication confirmed. Welcome back to the fight. The subtle emphasis on back confirmed Morrison's suspicions. Chen knew exactly who she was supporting tonight, and the mission had been orchestrated by someone with knowledge of their shared history. The realization that powerful forces were manipulating events for unknown purposes should have concerned Morrison, but instead, he felt a familiar surge of adrenaline that reminded him why he had become addicted to combat aviation. Team lead, we're approaching the drop zone, Rodriguez reported. Weather conditions are optimal, winds light and variable. Morrison acknowledged the report while monitoring the air-to-ground coordination frequency. Chen's voice filled his earpiece as she coordinated with ground control stations, her professional demeanor masking the deadly precision that had made her legendary within the fighter community. Two F-16C Fighting Falcons orbited the target area at 25,000 feet, their advanced sensors building a comprehensive picture of the tactical situation below. Groundhog 6, Viper lead. We have eyes on target compound. Count 15 to 20 military-age males, 3 probable hostages in the central building. Multiple vehicle positions suggest organized defensive posture. Recommend approach from grid coordinate 1247 for optimal concealment. Morrison studied his map, recognizing the tactical analysis that could only come from someone who understood both aerial and ground perspectives. Chen had identified an approach route that would provide maximum cover while positioning the team for effective assault on the target building. Her recommendations reflected the synthesis of aerial reconnaissance and ground combat knowledge that had made their previous collaborations so successful. The red light above the cargo door illuminated, indicating 5 minutes to the drop zone. Morrison's team moved into position, their movements economical and precise. Years of training had prepared them for this moment, but none of them understood the deeper implications of tonight's mission. They were about to witness the reunion of 2 legendary operators whose classified collaboration had redefined modern combat tactics. Viper lead, Groundhog 6, requesting detailed threat assessment on anti-aircraft positions. Chen's response was immediate and comprehensive. Groundhog 6, we have identified 3 probable SAM sites. Primary threat bearing 0930 from target, secondary threats at 1150 and 2740. Recommend final approach altitude below 500 feet AGL to minimize exposure. We'll maintain high cover and engage threats on your command. The green light activated, and Morrison's team moved toward the aircraft's open door. The night air rushed into the cargo compartment, carrying the familiar scent of high-altitude operations. Morrison checked his altimeter one final time before stepping into the darkness, his team following in precise intervals. The parachute deployment was flawless, with all 6 operators achieving stable descent toward their designated landing zone. Morrison monitored his GPS coordinates while scanning the terrain below for signs of enemy activity. The compound appeared as a cluster of dim lights surrounded by the natural darkness of rural Afghanistan. Intelligence had been accurate regarding the target's location, but Morrison knew that ground truth often differed significantly from aerial reconnaissance. The landing was executed without incident, with the team assembling at their predetermined rally point within minutes of touchdown. Morrison immediately established communication with Chen's flight while his operators prepared for the approach to the target compound. The tactical radio crackled with updates from the orbiting F-16s, painting a detailed picture of enemy positions and movements. Groundhog 6, Viper lead. Be advised, thermal imaging shows increased activity around the central building. Possible hostage movement. Recommend expedited timeline. Morrison acknowledged the transmission while issuing movement orders to his team. The approach to the target would require nearly 2 hours of careful movement through terrain that offered minimal concealment. Every minute of delay increased the risk that the militants would relocate or eliminate their hostages. The pressure of time compressed against the requirement for stealth, creating the tension that defined special operations. The team moved through the darkness using night vision equipment that transformed the landscape into green-tinted clarity. Morrison led from the front, his experience in both ground and aerial operations providing insights that enhanced traditional SEAL tactics. He understood how the orbiting F-16s were tracking their movement, and he positioned the team to maximize the effectiveness of potential air support. 2 hours into the approach, Rodriguez signaled contact with enemy sentries positioned along the compound's northern perimeter. Morrison studied the tactical situation through his night vision scope, counting at least 4 armed guards maintaining watch over the approaches to the target building. The militants appeared alert and professionally positioned, suggesting military training that exceeded typical insurgent capabilities. Viper lead, Groundhog 6. We have visual on target compound. Request updated thermal scan of interior positions. Chen's F-16 performed a high-altitude pass that provided detailed thermal imagery of the compound's interior. Groundhog 6. Thermal shows 3 heat signatures in the central building, consistent with hostage positions. Count 12 additional signatures distributed throughout the compound. Recommend simultaneous assault to prevent hostage elimination. The tactical problem was complex, but solvable. Morrison's team would need to neutralize the external guards while simultaneously breaching the central building to secure the hostages. Success required precise timing and overwhelming violence of action. The margin for error was non-existent, and failure would result in both hostage casualties and team members walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Morrison divided his team into 2 elements. Rodriguez and Blake would eliminate the northern sentries while Williams led the assault on the central building. Morrison would coordinate both elements while maintaining communication with air support. The plan was aggressive but necessary, given the time constraints and tactical situation. All elements, this is Groundhog 6. Execute on my mark. Morrison paused, ensuring his team was in position. Mark. The assault began with suppressed gunfire that eliminated the external sentries before they could raise an alarm. Rodriguez and Blake moved with practiced efficiency, their specialized weapons ensuring that threat elimination was both swift and silent. Meanwhile, Williams led the breach of the central building using explosive charges that created entry points while minimizing risk to the hostages inside. Morrison monitored the assault through his team's helmet cameras while maintaining communication with Chen's flight overhead. The operation unfolded with clockwork precision until insurgent reinforcements began arriving from positions that hadn't appeared on aerial reconnaissance. The tactical situation shifted from controlled assault to defensive fighting as Morrison's team found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Viper lead, Groundhog 6. We have contact. Multiple insurgent vehicles approaching from the south. Request immediate air support. Chen's response reflected the calm professionalism that had made her legendary. Groundhog 6, Viper lead. Identify target vehicles for immediate engagement. We're starting our attack run now. The night sky erupted in thunder as Chen's F-16 dove toward the approaching vehicles, her 20mm cannon stitching destruction across the insurgent convoy. Secondary explosions illuminated the darkness as fuel tanks and ammunition stores detonated under the precision fire. The attack was devastating in its effectiveness, eliminating the reinforcement threat while providing Morrison's team with the breathing space needed to complete their mission. But the engagement had attracted attention from the anti-aircraft positions that Chun had identified during initial reconnaissance. The first surface-to-air missile launched just as Chen's F-16 began its climb from the attack run, the weapon's infrared seeker tracking the fighter's hot exhaust signature. Warning alarms filled Chen's cockpit as her defensive systems detected the incoming threat. Morrison watched through his night vision as Chen's aircraft deployed countermeasures and executed evasive maneuvers that pushed both pilot and plane to their absolute limits. The F-16 twisted through a series of high-G turns that would have incapacitated most aviators, but Chen maintained control while defeating the missile's guidance system. The weapon detonated harmlessly several hundred meters from her aircraft, its proximity close enough to rattle Morrison despite his position on the ground. Viper lead, Groundhog 6. Nice flying. Are you mission capable? Chen's voice carried the hint of adrenaline that followed survival of a near-miss engagement. Groundhog 6, Viper lead. Aircraft is green, continuing mission. But we have more SAMs in the air. Recommend expedited extraction. The hostage rescue had been successful, with all 3 American contractors secured and ready for extraction. But the insurgents had revealed capabilities that exceeded intelligence estimates, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Morrison's team needed to reach the extraction point, while Chin's flight provided cover against increasingly sophisticated air defenses. The movement to the extraction zone required 40 minutes of careful navigation through terrain that was now actively contested by insurgent forces seeking to prevent the team's escape. Morrison employed tactics that drew upon his understanding of both ground combat and aerial operations, positioning his team to maximize the effectiveness of air support while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Chin's F-16 flight provided continuous cover during the extraction movement, their presence deterring ground attacks while engaging targets that posed threats to the SEAL team. The coordination between ground and air elements achieved a level of precision that reflected years of training and combat experience. Morrison found himself thinking like both a SEAL commander and an Air Force tactical officer, synthesizing perspectives that enhanced his team's effectiveness. The extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, its crew executing a tactical landing that minimized exposure time while maximizing security. Morrison's team loaded the rescued hostages and prepared for immediate departure, but the tactical situation continued to deteriorate as more insurgent forces converged on their position. As the helicopter lifted off, Morrison established final communication with Chin's flight. Viper lead, Groundhog 6. Mission accomplished. Thank you for the cover. Chin's response carried undertones that extended beyond professional acknowledgement. Groundhog 6, Viper lead. Outstanding work tonight. Perhaps we should discuss coordination procedures when you return to base. Morrison understood the invitation embedded within Chin's words. The successful mission had demonstrated the value of their unique collaborative capabilities, but it had also revealed the existence of operational requirements that transcended traditional service boundaries. The night's events had forced Morrison to confront the reality that his Air Force past wasn't a buried chapter, but rather a defining element of his military identity that would continue to shape his future operations. The secure debriefing room at Bugram Airfield felt different from the countless others Morrison had sat in during his career. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the metal table where he now faced Colonel James Mitchell, the Air Force officer who had overseen Operation Nighthawk 12 years earlier. Mitchell had aged considerably, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the military's most innovative tactical planners. Commander Morrison, Mitchell began, sliding a classified folder across the table. Last night's operation was successful beyond our most optimistic projections. The coordination between your SEAL team and Captain Chin's flight achieved precision levels that our analysts are calling unprecedented. Morrison remained silent, studying Mitchell's expression for clues about the true purpose of this meeting. The colonel had been instrumental in Morrison's original assignment to the Air Force Exchange Program, and his presence at tonight's debriefing suggested implications far beyond a simple hostage rescue mission. Sir, with respect, I don't believe this was a coincidence, Morrison said, opening the folder to reveal documentation about a new classified program. The tactical call signs, the pilot assignments, even the mission profile, someone orchestrated tonight's events to demonstrate something specific. Mitchell smiled, an expression that held both approval and regret. You always were perceptive, Jake. Yes, last night was a demonstration, but not for the reasons you might think. The folder contained details about Project Synthesis, a classified initiative designed to integrate special operations capabilities across service boundaries. Morrison read the executive summary with growing amazement, recognizing his own tactical innovations from the Air Force Exchange Program woven throughout the document. Someone had been studying his methods for over a decade, refining and expanding them into a comprehensive doctrine. The Pentagon has spent years analyzing the lessons learned from operations like Nighthawk, Mitchell explained. Your unique background, SEAL training combined with tactical aviation experience, produced results that traditional command structures couldn't replicate. Project Synthesis is designed to create more operators with your capabilities. Morrison looked up from the documents, his mind racing through the implications. You want to create hybrid operators, people who think like both ground combatants and aviators. Precisely. The nature of modern warfare requires coordination between platforms that most commanders don't truly understand. A SEAL team leader who has flown combat missions approaches tactical problems differently than someone who has only operated on the ground. An Air Force pilot who has conducted ground operations provides air support with precision that pure aviators can't match. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity, but Morrison understood the complexities involved in implementation. Military services guarded their traditions jealously, and cross-training programs often fell victim to bureaucratic resistance and resource limitations. Creating truly hybrid operators would require support at the highest levels of government. "What's my role in this?" Morrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mitchell leaned forward, his expression intensifying. "You would lead the program, select candidates from all services, design the training curriculum, and oversee the development of integrated tactics. Essentially, you would be creating a new type of special operations unit that doesn't exist within current organizational structures." The offer was extraordinary, representing opportunities that Morrison had never imagined possible. Leading Project Synthesis would allow him to influence military doctrine at the strategic level while working with the most elite operators from every service branch. But accepting would mean abandoning his SEAL team and stepping into a world where his Air Force background would no longer be hidden. "There's something else," Mitchell continued, producing another folder marked with classification levels that Morrison had rarely encountered. "Captain Chun has been selected as the Air Force liaison for Project Synthesis. If you accept command of the program, you two would be working together to develop the integration protocols." Morrison felt a complex mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Working with Chun again would provide access to her exceptional tactical abilities, but it would also force him to confront feelings that had been buried since Operation Nighthawk. Their professional relationship had always existed on the edge of something deeper, though military regulations and operational necessities had prevented exploration of personal connections. The debriefing room door opened, and Chin entered wearing a flight suit that bore the insignia of her current rank, Lieutenant Colonel. She had been promoted twice since their last meeting, and her confident bearing reflected the leadership responsibilities that came with senior officer status. Morrison stood as she approached, noting how easily they fell into the formal protocols that had governed their previous interactions. "Commander Morrison," Chin said, extending her hand. "Excellent work last night. Your team's coordination was flawless." "Colonel Chun," Morrison replied, accepting her handshake and noting the strength of her grip. "Your air support made the difference. We couldn't have completed the mission without precise engagement of those reinforcement vehicles." Mitchell observed their interaction with satisfaction. "I'll leave you two to discuss the operational details. Commander Morrison, I need your decision regarding Project Synthesis within 72 hours. Colonel Chun can provide additional context about the Air Force perspective on the program." After Mitchell departed, Morrison and Chin found themselves alone for the first time since Operation Nighthawk. The years had treated her well, though Morrison could see the stress lines around her eyes that came from commanding fighter squadrons in combat zones. Her presence filled the room with an energy that reminded him of their previous collaborations. "Jake," Chin said, dropping the formal protocols now that they were alone. "I wasn't sure you'd remember the authentication codes from Nighthawk." "Those codes are burned into my memory," Morrison replied, "along with everything else from that operation." Chin moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where F-16 Fighting Falcons sat ready for the next mission. "I've thought about that operation more times than I can count. What we accomplished together changed how I approach every tactical problem. Having a ground operator who understood aerial perspectives made coordination seamless in ways that traditional methods couldn't achieve." Morrison joined her at the window, watching ground crews prepare aircraft for evening missions. "The exchange program gave me insights that have influenced every operation I've led since. Understanding how air support actually works, rather than just how to request it, made me a better commander." Project Synthesis could formalize that knowledge, Chin continued. "Instead of random chance creating operators like us, we could design a system that produces hybrid capabilities intentionally. The strategic implications are enormous." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing the Project Synthesis documentation, identifying potential challenges and opportunities within the proposed program structure. Morrison found himself impressed by the thoroughness of the planning and the level of support that the program enjoyed within the Pentagon. Someone with significant influence believed that hybrid operators represented the future of special operations. There's something you should know, Chen said as their review concluded. Project Synthesis isn't just about creating new operators. It's also about preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. You're one of only 3 people who have successfully completed both ground special operations and tactical aviation training at the level required for this program. Morrison raised an eyebrow. 3 people. The other 2 are dead, Chen replied quietly. Killed in operations that their unique skills had made possible, but couldn't ultimately protect them from. You're the sole survivor of the original exchange program, and your knowledge dies with you unless we can transfer it to the next generation. The weight of that responsibility settled over Morrison like a physical burden. The tactics and techniques he had developed during his Air Force assignment represented years of innovation that could benefit countless future operations. Allowing that knowledge to disappear would be a disservice to both the operators who might employ it and the mission they existed to accomplish. What about command resistance? Morrison asked. Cross-service programs face political challenges that purely internal initiatives avoid. Chun smiled, an expression that carried hints of the aggressive pilot who had earned her call sign through combat performance. That's where the demonstration missions come in. Last night's success will be followed by others, each one proving the value of integrated operations. By the time Project Synthesis requests formal authorization, the results will speak for themselves. Morrison understood the strategy. Rather than fighting bureaucratic battles in conference rooms, they would prove their concepts in combat. Success would create momentum that could overcome institutional resistance, while failure would eliminate the program without wasting additional resources. It was a high-risk approach that appealed to Morrison's operational instincts. Assuming I accept command of Project Synthesis, Morrison said, what would be our first priority? Candidate selection, Chen replied immediately. We need to identify operators from each service who have the intellectual flexibility and physical capabilities required for cross-training. The selection process will be more rigorous than any existing special operations program. They spent another hour discussing selection criteria, training methodologies, and operational concepts. Morrison found his enthusiasm building as the scope of the program became clear. Project Synthesis represented an opportunity to influence military doctrine at the strategic level while working with exceptional operators from all service branches. As their discussion concluded, Chen gathered the classified documents and prepared to return to her squadron. Jake, I hope you'll accept this opportunity. What we could accomplish together with proper resources and institutional support would far exceed anything we achieved during our previous collaborations. Morrison watched her leave, noting how naturally she moved through the military environment that had shaped both their careers. The offer to command Project Synthesis represented everything he had worked toward during his years in special operations, but accepting would require abandoning the SEAL team that had become his family. That evening, Morrison walked through the SEAL compound where his team was celebrating their successful mission. Rodriguez was recounting tactical details to junior operators, while Williams coordinated with intelligence officers for threat analysis updates. Blake approached with questions about advanced infiltration techniques, his combat baptism having transformed uncertainty into professional curiosity. Commander, Blake said, last night's coordination with air support was incredible. I've never seen anything like the precision of those strikes. It was like the pilots could read our minds. Morrison nodded, understanding that Blake was describing the result of years of cross-training and combat experience that most operators would never obtain. Effective coordination requires understanding how all the pieces fit together, he replied. Ground operations and air support aren't separate activities. They're parts of a single tactical system. As the evening progressed, Morrison found himself studying his team with new appreciation for their capabilities and limitations. They were exceptional operators by any measure, but their perspectives were shaped by single service training that created boundaries around their tactical thinking. Project Synthesis could produce operators who transcended those boundaries, approaching complex problems with integrated solutions that no current program could provide. The decision regarding Project Synthesis would determine not only Morrison's future, but potentially the direction of special operations doctrine for decades to come. The weight of that responsibility was balanced against the loyalty he owed to his current team and the uncertainty inherent in pioneering a completely new type of military program. Morrison spent the night reviewing classified materials and analyzing the strategic implications of Project Synthesis. By dawn, he had reached a decision that would change everything about his military career and force him to confront aspects of his identity that had been hidden for over a decade. 6 months after accepting command of Project Synthesis, Morrison stood in the briefing room of a classified facility that officially didn't exist. The location was listed in Pentagon records as a routine training compound, but the reality was far more complex. The facility housed the most ambitious cross-service training program in military history, where elite operators from every branch learned to think beyond the boundaries of traditional warfare. Morrison surveyed the 18 candidates who represented the first class of Project Synthesis operators. Army Rangers sat beside Air Force pilots, while Navy SEALs studied tactics with Marine Force recon veterans. The diversity of backgrounds created an intellectual energy that Morrison had never encountered in conventional military training environments. Each candidate had been selected not just for their operational excellence, but for their ability to adapt to completely new approaches to combat. Today marks the beginning of Phase 3 training, Morrison announced to the assembled group. For the past 4 months, you've learned how each service approaches tactical problems differently. Now you'll begin integration exercises that require synthesis of all those perspectives into unified operational concepts. Lieutenant Colonel Chun entered the briefing room carrying flight gear and tactical equipment that reflected her dual role as both pilot and ground combatant. Over the past 6 months, she had undergone the same cross-training regimen as the candidates, adding ground combat skills to her aerial expertise. The transformation had been remarkable, creating an operator whose capabilities transcended traditional service boundaries. This afternoon's exercise will test your ability to coordinate complex operations from both ground and aerial perspectives. Chun continued Morrison's briefing. Half of you will serve as ground elements while the others provide air support. The scenario requires seamless integration between platforms to accomplish objectives that neither element could achieve independently. The exercise took place in a training area that replicated the complexity of modern battlefields. Urban environments intersected with rural terrain, creating tactical challenges that required innovative solutions. Morrison and Chun observed from a mobile command post, monitoring communications between ground and air elements while evaluating the effectiveness of integrated tactics. Captain Williams, Morrison's former SEAL teammate who had been selected for Project Synthesis, led one of the ground elements through a simulated hostage rescue. His team moved with practiced efficiency, but Morrison noted how Williams now positioned his operators to maximize the effectiveness of air support rather than simply requesting assistance when needed. The transformation reflected Williams's new understanding of aerial perspectives gained through the cross-training program. Major Rodriguez, the Army Ranger pilot who represented Project Synthesis's most successful conversion, provided close air support with precision that exceeded traditional capabilities. His ground combat experience allowed him to anticipate tactical requirements before they were communicated, positioning his aircraft to provide optimal support throughout the operation's evolution. Beautiful coordination, Chun observed as Rodriguez's aircraft executed a precision strike that eliminated simulated threats without endangering the ground team. He's thinking like both a pilot and a ground combatant simultaneously. Morrison nodded, noting how the exercise demonstrated capabilities that had been theoretical when Project Synthesis began. The candidates were developing tactical instincts that integrated perspectives from multiple services, creating solutions that pure single-service training couldn't produce. The exercise concluded with successful completion of all objectives, but Morrison's attention was focused on the post-operation debriefing. The candidates analyzed their performance using language that blended terminologies from different services, describing tactical problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously. They were becoming hybrid operators in ways that exceeded the program's original goals. Commander Morrison, Captain Blake, the former SEAL who had been Morrison's youngest team member, approached after the debriefing concluded. Blake had thrived in the cross-training environment, his natural adaptability making him one of the program's most promising candidates. I wanted to discuss the Special Operations Integration course. Are there additional aviation modules available? Morrison smiled, recognizing the intellectual curiosity that made Blake exceptional. Talk to Colonel Chun about advanced tactical aviation training. She's developed specialized modules for operators who show aptitude for aerial perspectives. As the candidates dispersed to prepare for evening training, Morrison found himself alone with Chun for the first time in weeks. The demands of Project Synthesis had consumed their time, leaving little opportunity for personal conversation despite their close working relationship. The candidates are exceeding every performance metric we established, Chun observed, reviewing training data on her tablet. Their tactical problem-solving capabilities are developing faster than our most optimistic projections suggested. Morrison agreed, though his thoughts were occupied by broader implications of their success. Pentagon briefings are scheduled for next month. If the demonstrations go well, Project Synthesis will receive permanent authorization and expanded funding. The prospect of program expansion was exciting, but Morrison understood the challenges that came with institutional recognition. Success would bring bureaucratic oversight that could compromise the program's innovative approaches. They would need to balance growth with preservation of the qualities that made Project Synthesis unique. Jake, Chun said, using his first name despite their professional setting. There's something I need to discuss with you. I've been offered command of the 355th Fighter Wing. It would mean promotion to full colonel, but it would also end my involvement with Project Synthesis. Morrison felt a complex mixture of professional satisfaction and personal loss. Chun's promotion was well-deserved recognition of her exceptional capabilities, but her departure would eliminate the Air Force expertise that had been crucial to the program's success. More personally, her absence would end a professional partnership that had become central to his military identity. Congratulations, Morrison replied, his voice carrying genuine warmth despite his conflicted emotions. The 355th will benefit enormously from your leadership. Chun studied his expression, searching for indications of his personal reaction to her news. The position doesn't begin for 6 months. That gives us time to identify and train my replacement within Project Synthesis. They spent the evening reviewing potential candidates for Chun's position, evaluating Air Force officers who possessed the combination of tactical aviation excellence and adaptability required for cross-service integration. The discussion was professionally productive, but Morrison found his attention divided between program requirements and the reality that his closest professional partnership was ending. 3 weeks later, Morrison stood before a room filled with Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and senior military leadership. The Project Synthesis demonstration had been scheduled as the culmination of months of preparation, with the program's future depending on the effectiveness of their presentation. Project Synthesis has produced 18 operators who represent a new paradigm in special operations capabilities. Morrison began his briefing. These individuals think beyond traditional service boundaries, approaching tactical problems with integrated perspectives that create solutions unavailable through conventional training. The demonstration that followed showcased the candidates performing complex scenarios that required seamless coordination between ground and air elements. The observers watched with growing amazement as operations unfolded with precision that exceeded traditional capabilities. Morrison and Chun narrated the tactical evolution, explaining how cross-service training enabled innovations that pure single-service approaches couldn't achieve. General Patricia Hayes, the Joint Chiefs representative who would determine Project Synthesis's future, questioned the candidates directly about their training experiences. Her inquiries revealed the depth of their transformation from single-service operators to truly hybrid professionals. Captain Williams, General Hayes addressed Morrison's former teammate. How has cross-service training changed your approach to mission planning? Williams responded with confidence that reflected his new capabilities. Ma'am, I now consider tactical problems from multiple dimensional perspectives. Instead of planning ground operations and requesting air support, I design integrated operations where ground and air elements function as components of unified tactical systems. The response impressed the observers, who recognized that Williams was describing capabilities that military doctrine had long sought but never achieved. Similar demonstrations throughout the afternoon proved that Project Synthesis had successfully created a new type of operator whose abilities transcended traditional boundaries. Commander Morrison, General Hayes said as the demonstration concluded, Project Synthesis represents one of the most innovative programs I've encountered in 30 years of military service. The capabilities you've developed have strategic implications that extend far beyond special operations. Morrison understood that the general's words indicated approval, but he also recognized the challenges that would accompany program expansion. Success would bring opportunities to influence military doctrine at the highest levels, but it would also require navigating political complexities that could compromise the program's innovative character. The official authorization came 2 weeks later, along with funding for expansion to multiple training facilities and development of advanced curriculum modules. Project Synthesis would become a permanent component of military special operations, with Morrison remaining as program commander and Chun serving as Air Force liaison until her transfer to the 355th Fighter Wing. On Chin's final day with Project Synthesis, Morrison found her in the aircraft hangar where they had conducted countless training exercises. She was reviewing equipment that would remain with the program, ensuring smooth transition to her replacement. The setting reminded Morrison of their first meeting 12 years earlier, though both had changed dramatically since Operation Nighthawk. Any regrets about leaving? Morrison asked as he joined her beside an F-16 simulator that had been crucial to candidate training. Chun smiled, an expression that carried both satisfaction and melancholy. None about the promotion. Some about ending our partnership. We've accomplished something remarkable with Project Synthesis. Morrison nodded, understanding that their professional collaboration had produced results that neither could have achieved independently. The program will continue evolving. What we've built here will influence military operations for decades. They spent Chin's final evening reviewing program documentation and discussing future development priorities. The conversation was professionally focused, but Morrison sensed underlying emotions that neither felt comfortable expressing given their military environment and professional responsibilities. Jake, Chin said as their final meeting concluded, Project Synthesis wouldn't exist without your vision and leadership. Don't let bureaucratic pressures compromise what makes this program special. Morrison watched her leave, understanding that he was observing the end of a partnership that had defined his military career since Operation Nighthawk. Chin's influence extended beyond tactical innovations to the personal growth that had enabled Morrison to synthesize his Air Force and SEAL experiences into something greater than either could provide alone. 6 months later, Morrison stood before a new class of Project Synthesis candidates, noting how the program had evolved since its inception. The facility now housed advanced training equipment that enabled even more sophisticated cross-service integration, while the curriculum had been refined based on lessons learned from the first graduating class. Project Synthesis exists because warfare has evolved beyond the capabilities of traditional service structures, Morrison told the new candidates. Your mission is to become operators who think beyond those boundaries, creating solutions that pure single-service approaches cannot provide. The new class included candidates whose backgrounds represented even greater diversity than the original group. Air Force drone operators sat beside Navy submarine commanders, while Army Special Forces medics learned alongside Marine Corps intelligence specialists. The intellectual energy reminded Morrison of the program's early days, though institutional support had eliminated many of the resource constraints that had initially limited development. Morrison's personal tablet displayed a message from Chun, now commanding the 355th Fighter Wing with distinction. Her units were employing tactics developed through Project Synthesis, demonstrating the program's influence on conventional military operations. The message included updates about former candidates who were leading integrated operations throughout the military, proving that Project Synthesis had achieved its goal of transforming special operations doctrine. As the day's training concluded, Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought him from hiding his Air Force background to commanding a program that celebrated cross-service integration. The classified exchange program that had once been a buried chapter of his career had become the foundation for innovations that influenced military operations at the strategic level. The candidates dispersed to prepare for evening training exercises, their conversations blending terminologies from multiple services as they discussed tactical problems from integrated perspectives. Morrison recognized that they represented the future of special operations, operators whose capabilities transcended traditional boundaries through training that celebrated diversity of experience rather than conformity to single-service doctrine. Project Synthesis had proven that legends could emerge from unexpected combinations of training and experience. Morrison's Air Force background, once hidden among his SEAL teammates, had become the foundation for a program that created new legends through synthesis of capabilities that conventional wisdom had considered incompatible. The program would continue evolving, but its core principle remained constant. The most innovative solutions emerged when exceptional operators were encouraged to transcend the boundaries that limited traditional military thinking.